Welcome to Cooper Talk. I'm your host, Steve Cooper, and remember, I'm only as hip as my guest. I got to tell you something, people. I'm very excited to have this gentleman on my show today. He was on 11 years ago when I lived in Burbank, and I remember it was so cool because like a year later, I was doing background work on a lot, and I walked by him, and I forget what lot it was. I think it might have been Warner Brothers, but it was so good to see him. He was walking, I guess, from shooting his show, and he's one of these guys. He's not only a great actor, he's a great writer. He's a historian. He's a veteran. He's lived quite the life. And my guest is Jim Beaver. How you doing, Jim?
I'm good, Steve. To the best of my knowledge, I'm great.
That's good. I noticed you're doing a lot of cons lately. How fun is that for an actor? Because I know you do it from Supernatural and you've had so many other iconic roles. What is that like going to a con and seeing people that they love you, they love your talent? What is that like for an actor? Because you're a very humble guy.
It's it's like the world's biggest family reunion, except you like everybody. Um, it's a lot of fun. First of all, it's hard not to enjoy um, people showing up someplace because they like your work. Um, and It can be exhausting. It usually is. Um, because of my age, everything's exhausting, but I, um, I really enjoy it. I really do enjoy it. I like, I like the interaction between the fans and the actors, and I enjoy meeting people and hearing their stories uh, and their anecdotes about how the show affected them, or um, and then I get to travel to places I might not necessarily ever go. Um, and then I get to see my friends from the show very often, or friends from other shows it really is. It's every one of them is kind of like a reunion. It's kind of like Disneyland on the worst day of the year, and it's kind of like the world's biggest um, um, what are they? Street fair. Um, I have a lot of fun. I have a lot of fun. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because you have had so many great roles, but you were very, I wanted you to go over your path because you were in the military in Vietnam, and then you didn't want to go into acting, right? You wanted to be a writer, weren't you? Writing something on George Reeves, or weren't you some kind of a story project? What's your background? Because it's quite fascinating that you didn't start off on this trajectory to be an actor, but then you've ended up in all these amazing roles and had such an amazing career.
Well, I was as a teenager, I was a movie fanatic, still am, uh, and I grew very interested in the lives of people who made movies uh, and television to an extent. And I read in high school, I read the actor Sterling Hayden's autobiography, Wanderer, which imbued in me a dual ambition of being a writer and of um, being a sailing man and having my own schooner and sailing around the world writing. Well, I wrote. Uh, uh, I never got past being a tour guide on a schooner in New York Harbor, um, but it did make me want to write, and it made me feel like maybe I had something to say. I don't know. Um, I went into the Marines right out of high school, and into Vietnam. And then when I came out, I I really wanted to take film history courses because I wanted to learn more and more and more about how about the history of movies. It was just a fascinating subject for me. But this was a long time ago. Did I mention Vietnam? It was a long time ago. Um, and there were very few schools with film history courses that weren't either in New York or Southern California that I was aware of. And I was in Texas where I grew up. Um, so when I went to school, I decided to sign up for theater classes because I thought it was kind of close and it might give me some feeling for what it was I really wanted to study. And then I got cast in a small part in a play and decided that's what I was going to do the rest of my life. And it's one of the few things I've said I was going to do that I did. Um, yeah, I just fell in love with it. And I kept writing. I wrote plays. I wrote a book while I was in college. Um, but once I had a taste of acting, uh, I just never looked back. That was all I wanted to do. Um, for a while, all I really got to do was write. I had some plays produced, and ultimately, a few years later, I began to write television, which is really how I broke into the industry. Um, but in my heart, it was always about I got to figure out a way to act uh, because it really fulfilled me.
Now, what was some of your television writing? What did you write for Hitchcock, or what did you wrote for a few shows, right?
Yeah, just to make clear, I wrote for the revival
Right.
of the Alfred Hitchcock series, not the one in the 50s. Um, yeah, that was where I think I got my first television job was writing episodes of the revival of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and um, I wrote several of those, and um, it was it was the mid to late 50s, and they were just Hollywood was really just starting to come to terms with the Vietnam War. Um, the war had been over for 10 or 15 years, but uh, Hollywood had kind of avoided it. And in the mid to late 80s, they decided to start exploring it some. And they were looking, a lot of people were looking for writers who were Vietnam vets because they figured they could write from the most experience and with the most authenticity. And so I got several jobs that were related to my having been a vet. An HBO series called Vietnam War Story and a CBS series called Tour of Duty that I wrote for. And so for a while there, I had a pretty good little career going writing for television. Um, my big problem was that if you're a halfway decent writer, they kind of want you to come on staff and work full time for them. And that didn't give me room to act. So I always uh, restricted myself to freelance stuff. And that was a time in the 80s and before the 80s when a writer could write freelance for any number of shows, as many scripts as he could pour out, he could probably find a show that would hire him to write them without being tied to that show. And I did that for a year or two, and then the bottom fell out of the freelance market, and they started. I think they realized that their staffs could write everything just as fast, and nobody had to have a learning curve on the show. And they just stopped pretty much hiring freelance writers. And since that's all I wanted to be if I was going to write, um, it all kind of the writing just stopped. And I don't think I'm not sure I've earned another nickel from writing since 1988.
Yeah, it's amazing that it stopped, but then you got to flourish into what you really wanted to do. I mean, that's one thing about Hollywood.
Mhm.
You were being successful, but it wasn't what you wanted to do. And that happens so many
Yeah.
times. People have that in Hollywood. So when do you start? Because I want to talk about all these juicy roles you've had, but when do you start getting acting on TV or movies? What is your first break? Because you're done writing, so now you can concentrate. What path do you take? What happens?
Well, I didn't know I was done writing. Um, uh, this all occurred during and as a result of the 1988 writers' strike. Uh, we were all just sitting around twiddling our thumbs during the strike because we couldn't write for anybody. And uh, I didn't know that it wasn't going to come back. Um, but so I spent a lot of time at my literary agent's office, hanging around with Paul Allen Smith and just shooting the breeze because neither one of us had anything much to do. And he was quite a mentor to me and uh, kept me on the right path in terms of my approach to the work. But one day I was leaving his office, and as we walked out of it, he spotted somebody in the hall and took me over and introduced me to a woman named Eileen Feldman, who was a theatrical talent agent for actors there at the agency. And he just introduced me. He knew I was an actor, and I guess he thought, oh, it'll be good for you to meet somebody on that side of the aisle. And and she said hi and then looked at me weird and said, "Are you an actor?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Are you represented?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Well, you might be right for this part in this Norman Jewison picture that's coming up. And would you mind if I uh, sent you in to audition for it?" And I'm thinking, this doesn't happen. Um, but I said yes, of course, and I went in a day or so later to read, um, and Norman took a liking to me, and he liked the fact that I was actually a vet because this movie was about Vietnam vets and the struggles they went through after the war, excuse me, after the war. So a couple of days later, she called me up and said, "You got this." And I was stunned because, first of all, if I'd walked through the door at my agent's office 10 seconds earlier, uh, you'd be talking to somebody else here. Um, it was that much of a serendipitous fluke. And why she thought I was right just on looking at my face, I don't know. Um, uh, the whole thing's kind of a mystery to me, but I was very grateful. And I did the picture, which was called In Country, and I played Bruce Willis's buddy, and it was a beautiful movie. I think by far the best work he ever did. Um, and I was really proud to be part of it. And Norman Jewison was amazing to me. And um, and then the agency signed me on as an actor client. And surprise, surprise, I never got any more writing work, but they started getting me a lot of acting work.
Well,
So
it is amazing. There's so many stories like that. So, you get this break, and you're right. It's timing. But I always say, a lot of times breaks, you can have all the timing in the world, but you have to have talent because
well,
if you suck, people will know. But so you got that part. So now do you start feeling heat from the industry because it's a Bruce Willis movie, it's a great movie. Are you feeling anything, or does getting a movie role help you start getting other work, or do you? It's basically they didn't recognize it.
I I thought I thought while I was doing it that my career was made. In some ways it was, but not the way I expected. First off, although the movie was wonderful and moving and touching and very affecting, and it didn't do terribly well at the box office. Um, and uh, the agency that had signed me, they were enthusiastic, particularly at first, um, but it was such a huge agency. I mean, Bruce was one of their clients. You know, they had major names on their client list, and they got me out for a lot of roles, and I got a lot of jobs, but they were smaller and smaller jobs, and for the most part, and uh, and I think ultimately they figured out that they could do better, they could make more money spending 5 minutes on the phone talking about Ed Harris, and instead of spending an hour on the phone trying to convince somebody to hire Jim Beaver, who they never heard of. And so eventually I moved over to a smaller agency that focused more on character guys, uh, and I wasn't competing with A-listers for parts I was never going to get. I mean, the first agency, they sent me in for the lead in a Disney series about Davy Crockett. Well, I don't know whatever happened to that show. I don't think it happened, but nobody was going to hire me for Davy Crockett when they could get Ed Harris. Uh, um, so uh, at first it was very discouraging because I really thought something was going to happen, and then it kind of didn't. But then with the second agency I was with, they concentrated more on the things that I could very well compete for, and uh, fairly quickly after landing there, I landed some nice little movie parts and uh, my first series regular role on a TV series, and
Was
which
that
was a
reason? Was
sitcom.
that Reasonable Dallas, or was it Thunder Alley? Which show is that?
It was Thunder Alley. It was Thunder Alley. Reasonable Doubts uh, was a great show that it had an unexpected impact on my life, but it was. But I was a recurring guest star on that. Thunder Alley was my first role as a series regular, and um, and history kind of repeated itself because that was a very popular show. We were number around number 13 in the Nielsen's. Um, we had audiences that today a broadcast network would kill for, um, and and we got canceled after the second year, and which was both a shock to us and the aftermath was a shock to me because I figured now I've done some movies, I've been a series regular on ABC. Uh, I just need to wait for that next phone call, which will be coming any minute, and it didn't. And so for the next few years, I just did a lot of guest shots, and I did some nice stuff in some big movies and um, some better stuff in some little movies, and it was pretty steady. It was for quite a while. I'm moving pretty fast through here, so but by the I got through the 90s working fairly regularly. Um, and then um, in the early 2000s, I was starting to worry a little bit. I had a new baby, and um, it's one thing to sleep on your friends' couches. It's another thing to ask your wife and baby to sleep on your friends' couches. And I started worrying about whether I was going to get enough work to support them. And and it was the first time since way back in 71 when I did that first play that I ever thought I may have to do something else. And and then David Milch called up and said, "Come do Deadwood."
Tell me about Devo, because you know it's funny. Well, it's funny when you said, you started worrying, because I think anyone does that. And I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs and stuff too. And we always worry. It's like you always think where's it going to come through. And even, sometimes it's not as bad as we think it is, but I think because we're creative, our mind puts us in that frame. We wake up in the middle of the night dwelling like, oh crap, what if 5 years from now? I
Yeah,
always say to my wife, I go, I hope we don't have to eat dog food, when we retire. And she's like, honey, we don't have to, we're homeowners. We're good.
yeah.
But I think that goes through our mind. So tell me about that, because it's funny. My good friend Joff Warner, his two favorite shows are Deadwood and Supernatural. They're his two favorite shows
Well,
ever.
he's a very perspicacious young man.
Exactly. So tell me about Deadwood. Tell me about, because I don't know if it was you told me the first time or it was someone else that said he wrote like a Shakespearean writing, but with just curses in it. I don't know if that was you, but someone
It
told me that
may,
story.
it was probably a lot of people. Yeah, it was, Deadwood was the most brilliant writing I've ever performed outside of Shakespeare. Um, it had that rhythm and meter to it. It had the intricacy of language. Um, the David wrote the show in large part in style. He wrote it um, the way people wrote letters back then, uh, with curlicues and flowery expression. And because most people who wrote letters were educated enough, and people were reading Dickens and Melville uh, uh, and not Dan Brown. And the people express themselves more ornately. Um, the one thing they didn't do, and it's the reason so many people thought the profanity in Deadwood was out of place, was they didn't write that stuff down, but they spoke it. They just didn't put it in books and letters. Um, so on one hand, he was writing dialogue straight out of 1876 correspondence. On the other hand, he was using the freedom of the language of the people on the street and incorporating it into that style. And the anecdote that they told us when we went up to Deadwood to do some research was that at one point, Deadwood was having something like a murder every day, the real Deadwood. And because at first there were no laws there, because there was no government. Uh, and somebody was getting killed every single day of the year. The very first law the city of Deadwood passed was a law against profanity because that was getting out of hand. So anybody who says they didn't talk like that back then uh, has only read the letters.
So what's it like as an actor when you have this, as you said, the best writing? I mean, do you have the talent because you got cast, but are you a little bit nervous because it's like you have this beautiful this stuff and you're like, I don't I man, this is what I live for. I mean, do you just come and it makes it so much easier? Plus the show had a great cast. So what is that like? What was it like walking onto the set for the first, few episodes?
Well, let me back up to my audition for the show. They sent me the audition scene, which happened to be the monologue that my character Ellsworth has in the pilot. And and I read this monologue and I thought, this part is mine. I may not get it. Somebody else may get it, but it belongs to me, because I read it and I knew exactly how he ought to be played. Uh, doesn't make me smarter than anybody because half the time scripts come along and I don't have any idea how they ought to be played. But this one, this one I knew, and there was there was something about the um, there was something about the rhythm of the language that made it really feel at home. I have a fair amount of experience doing Shakespeare, and I had the same kind of feeling. This rolls. It's yes, it's complicated, but it just flows off the tongue, uh, if you know how to say it. And uh, and it had the kind of gruff um, demeanor that I've found myself associated with on more than one occasion. And it was I loved how profane it was and how humorous it was and how beautifully intricately written it was. And I felt that way all the way through the 3 seasons of the show. Um, it was there were times it was so intricate that I didn't know exactly what I was saying. But with David, it was always uh, trust me, it'll play, and it would. And I mean, usually I figured out what it meant. It wasn't just utterly puzzling, but sometimes you had to work at it and go, okay, what's he saying here? He's saying this. Okay, okay, now I get it. Um, to me, the more intricate, the more complicated it became, the more beautiful it became, and the more fun and easy it became to play. Um, it's, oh God, it's horrible trying to act bad writing. It's just, you feel miserable. You feel like uh, you're going to get blamed for how badly this is written. Well, the reverse is true too. You know, nobody ever wins acting Oscars for playing bad writing. Uh, it's always what's on the page, and what was on David's pages was just sheer genius. Um, I sometimes on a gig you'll talk to the director or talk to the writer and say, okay, is there another way I can say this? Because this doesn't flow like real human speech to me, or I don't know how to make it flow. And sometimes they'll say, yeah, or sometimes they'll say, uh, no, say what's written. And sometimes they'll say, yeah, well, say whatever you want. And with David, you said what was on the page, but you didn't have to worry about whether it was good or whether it sounded like human beings were actually speaking it. Very little of that dialogue sounded like people actually talk, but that's because it's poetry, and poetry is a heightened form of human speech, and that's what I think the dialogue in Deadwood was. It was a thrill to be able to do it. What was scary was not the dialogue, it was the fact that sometimes you didn't find out what the dialogue was until the night before, the morning of. That's scary when you've got something that sounds like Henry V and they hand it to you 20 minutes before you shoot it. That's pretty frightening.
Now, what did you like so much about that character? Because the character, it's something that it's a great character. The show's great, but what is it that you, as an actor, you really like besides the writing, as you said, because that was given. But what did you like about the character? Did you see anything of you in that character? Because sometimes I think an actor has to spark inside some internal feelings.
Well, with David Milch, um, often it's him who spots some spark in you that becomes part of the character. Um, I There are a lot of examples, and I suspect a lot of actors who've worked with him and for him would tell you that their characters began to turn much closer and closer to who they really are. Um, because he writes very much to the actor. Uh, I Very early on, it was clear to me from the very first script that Ellsworth was uh, um, a rough and tumble sort of guy, but one who had a really good heart, who had a deep soulfulness about him, and that he was a reliable man, that he was loyal, that he was generally trustworthy. He was certainly willing to hide the truth or lead someone astray if he thought it would keep him alive or serve some greater good. But um, uh, he was kind of a scruffy mutt who would bare his teeth, but would attack a lion to preserve someone he cared about. And that was obvious right from the beginning to me. I know we were shooting the pilot, and I was talking to David about the character, and and this is the very first episode, and he didn't know particularly where all the characters were going in detail. But he said, I think Ellsworth may be the soul of the community. And I took that to heart, but I didn't really have to because he wrote it in every scene I played. Um, he did, uh, I think, very much as happened with Supernatural. I think elements of my own persona began to drift into the character. Um, Not that I'm necessarily as brave or smart as them, but certain elements. I think speech patterns sometimes uh, uh, were taken advantage of for the character, and um, I um, uh, I lost my wife Cecily between season one and season two of Deadwood, and uh, David being David, he wrote a scene for me in season two where Ellsworth talks about losing his wife. And I remember several people on the set saying, I can't believe he's doing this to you. I can't believe he's making you talk about, act this. And I said, man, you don't understand. This is a gift. This is a gift. There aren't many actors who get to approach a role with the resources I have. And it gives me a chance to make a little silk purse out of a great big sow's ear. And was delighted. He never asked me about it. He never talked to me about it. It just suddenly there was a scene where Ellsworth talks about losing his wife, and it was one of my favorite scenes I ever played, even though half the cast and crew thought he was being mean to me.
That's
So
that must have been very cathartic too. That must have been something that really, I mean,
yeah,
was it very hard to act at though without the emotions? I mean, because as you said, it was still new. The
yeah,
loss.
it was new, but I don't uh I can't think of anything other than bad writing that I have ever felt like I had a hard time playing. Either because of the emotions or, I mean, I've done some horrible, horrible things in movies and TV. Uh, Things that if I'd done them in real life, they'd put me away forever, and I would be shunned even by the hard timers in prison if I weren't shivved by them. Uh, and I don't have any problem playing that stuff. It doesn't it doesn't go home with me. I don't I don't I don't I may use sense memory. I've used the loss of my wife in a couple of occasions to just put myself back into how that feels. But once I'm done with the scene, I'm sorry the scene's over because I was having fun. I was enjoying what I was doing, even when it's deeply touching, deeply moving, extremely hard for the character. Man, I could do that all day. Uh, there have been times, there was a sequence on Supernatural, speaking of that kind of scene, where I had to deal with uh, uh, letting go of another character's wife. Uh, and we spent the whole day shooting this sequence where my character Bobby was on the verge of tears, just holding back tears as tightly as he could, trying desperately not to fall apart, but the tears welling up all the time. Well, you do that all day, your body doesn't know it isn't real. And and I went home that night and sobbed, just threw myself on the bed and cried like everybody I cared about had died. But I wouldn't trade that day for anything. And I didn't carry it with me the next day. It was just all pent up energy. It wasn't pent up emotion. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Makes sense. Now, okay, you mentioned Supernatural. Now you go from the Deadwood audience and the Supernatural audience are completely different audiences.
pretty
And
much.
now you're getting more probably more recognized for Supernatural. I saw your
Oh,
con,
yeah.
you do the Supernatural. So tell me, what was that like? Because I mean, your Instagram, you have over 440,000 followers. That's an amazing amount because I looked at your Instagram earlier.
Do I? I
Yeah, you
don't
have, but
even
you
go
haven't.
on it
The last time you
very
posted, you got like
often.
18,000 likes, 18,000 likes. But you got to go back
I
and
should
look at
look,
you.
I should look closer.
Now, tell me about Supernatural. What do you think made it endearing to people and it got such a fan base because it ran for a long time? And how did you get that part? Was that an offer or was it an audition or how did that come about?
Well, uh, I've got my story, and uh, the executive producer, Bob Singer, has his story. Uh, uh, and all I know is what happened to me. He says it happened different. I don't know. Uh, for my money, I went in to audition for it. Um, and the casting director told me that when she told Bob Singer who had auditioned, not he didn't see my audition tape, but he just found out who was on the tapes. He said, "Oh, just give it to Jim." That's my experience. Now, Bob says that they came up with this character, this gruff but lovable rural guy, and Uh, and Bob said, "Oh, I've got just the guy for it." Uh, he tells his story, I tell mine. I don't know exactly where the truth lies. Um, but I had worked for Bob 10, 12 years earlier on Reasonable Doubts, playing a homicide cop. And and then, a decade went by. I figured he'd forgotten who I was, but uh, either story says he knew who I was and just gave me the part.
Now, what did you like? What did you like about the character, and what did you like about that show?
Well, it was a show that I doubt seriously I ever would have watched. I'm not a fantasy, science fiction genre, those kind of genres uh, guy usually. I like a few examples, but I don't seek them out. So all I knew, it was two hunky guys fighting demons, and that didn't appeal to me. But a job's a job. And I went in, and everybody was really great, really nice people all the way around. Um, and the character was something that by that time had become kind of an unintentional stock in trade for me, which is, I keep using the term, gruff but lovable. A guy who was kind of no nonsense, who was snarky, who didn't have a lot of patience for idiots, and but who could be counted on, who was loyal and steadfast and brave and smart. And uh, ever since ever since first started doing work on camera, I've somehow fallen into parts that were primarily akin to that. The big exception being Thunder Alley, the sitcom I was on, where I played the village idiot. Uh, uh, um, Much more stupid and lovable than Gruff. Um, but I ended up playing a lot of homicide cops and a lot of detectives and soldiers, and it was all kind of they. I don't know if the industry paid enough attention to me to pigeonhole me, but I ended up pigeonholed uh, pretty much. And so Bobby Singer, the character, was familiar to me. It was a night. It was the kind of thing I like to play. It was fun, and what I didn't expect to happen was for the audience to take to him the way they did, and I think the reason that show became so successful is tied up in something uh, a number of fans have told me over the years, that they would have watched the show even if there weren't monsters. And for a show about monsters, that's a pretty wild thing to hear. Um, Bobby's got a line in one of the shows where he says, "Family don't end with blood." Well, that's really the core of the show. It's about relationships. It's about people looking out for each other, about people trying to do the next right thing. And it just happens to be in a world inhabited by monsters. Um, and once I realized that that's the kind of show they were trying to make, it became much more interesting to me. And it was always fun, cutting a demon's throat or, blasting a vampire. But uh, I've said this many times. Some of the best dramatic scenes I have ever had in my career were on Supernatural, and because the characters were rich and full, and uh, I never felt like, oh my God, how am I going to make sense out of this line? Um, uh, my streak of luck has been pretty damn good.
I was going to say that because it's funny also, because you've been in all these shows, but we forget too that you were in the same character in Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, which you were the arms dealer. So that's
Yeah.
something that once again, these shows are attracted. How did those parts come about? I mean, I can understand Better Call Saul, but once
Yeah.
again, you're on these shows that have these intense followings that even if you're on just a few episodes, they remember you. Was that an audition for Breaking Bad, or did they know you, or how did that all come about?
I uh Something happened after Deadwood. Uh See, it was interesting. Those Deadwood and Supernatural had uh had really different responses from different people. Uh Deadwood was very much a water cooler show within the industry. Um, and nobody in the industry seemed to have the slightest idea what Supernatural was. After Deadwood, once I was on Supernatural, I would go into meetings and people would say, "Oh my God, it's Ellsworth. Ellsworth, I love Deadwood. It's so amazing. What are you doing now?" I'm on this show, Supernatural. And they go, "Oh, is that a new show?" I say, "No, it's been on 12 years." And they go, "What?" So, but uh, if I walk through a mall in Omaha and get recognized, it's because of Supernatural. It's not Deadwood. I mean it happens, but uh, uh, the rule is that Supernatural's what the guy in Middle America knows me from. Deadwood's what the industry knows me from. And so something happened after Deadwood that had never happened to me before, and that was I started getting jobs by people who knew my work, who just called up and said, "Come do this." And boy, that had never happened. I was uh, there's there's no joy like the joy of a straight offer. Uh, and I believe, if I recall correctly, that's what happened with Breaking Bad. They just called up and said, "You want to come do this?" And um, I did the first one on a weekend during a Supernatural episode. Um, so, and I thought one scene in and out, no big deal. And that first scene in my first uh, um, uh, Breaking Bad has, it's possible more people have mentioned that to me than almost anything I've ever done, which shocks me because it was, 3 minutes. And um, I was dumbfounded by the the amount of complimentary comment I got on that little thing. And then to my delight, they brought me back, and then Better Call Saul came along, and they found a couple of places for me there, and uh, I just hope the producer Vince Gilligan writes another character who needs to buy a gun.
So now I want to talk about, and the season, the series is over, but once again, one of these shows that has that crowd, the boys, which I
Mhm.
love that show. And your character, you come in and it's just you're coming back. But that show to me, and I'm not someone who watches the superhero stuff, and I watched that one night and I went, this is so good. I
Yeah.
mean, I went, and it goes so further than that, and it reflects on what's going on in society somewhat. But what was that like in that role? I mean, because you did, was once again, was that a straight offer, or did they sit there and did you have to audition, or what? How did that come about?
Well, the creator of the show The Boys was also the creator of Supernatural, Eric
Okay.
Kripke. So yeah, that was a straight offer. I've done 4 or 5 of Eric's shows, and um, he he doesn't seem to believe I'm a bad luck charm. Um, uh, and I'm grateful for that. But uh, yeah, Eric had called me up at one point and said he wanted me to be on the show as um, I've forgotten the character's name, but it's the chief executive of Vought, the company that created the superheroes. Giancarlo Esposito played it in the series, but um, Eric called up and offered me that, and then um, uh, uh, Amazon said nobody will believe him as uh, a CEO. Uh, so Eric apologized for getting my hopes up, and then he made me president of the United States.
I was going to say that you can't be a CEO, but you can be president. So, what was it like shooting those scenes? Because Homelander was so just it's the cast was so good, and for me, there were a lot of I wasn't familiar with the actors. Maybe it's because I'm
Mhm.
older, but what was it like on the set there? Because you have people walking around like superheroes, and they have very strong and different personalities.
Well, fascinating thing about my experience on The Boys was that I was deep into season 4 before I met any of the superhero actors because I didn't have scenes with them. My first scenes were with Elizabeth Shue and with Giancarlo. Um, and the superheroes just weren't part of my experience there until late in season 4. And then I crossed paths with a few of them. Um, and then several of them toward the end of season 4. Uh, it was it's interesting you said that you don't really watch the superhero stuff. I don't either. Uh, I was a big superhero fan when I was a kid, and there are elements of that that still appeal to me, but I haven't read a comic book in decades, and I uh, there when Christopher Reeve was the only superhero at the movie theaters, I was interested. When there became uh, several score superheroes in the movie theaters, I lost interest pretty quick. Um, so I didn't care much about that aspect of it, but it was kind of fun being on the set with it. I had done a Lois and Clark years before, and it was very fun. I was the first guy that Dean Cain ever bounced, whoever bounced bullets off Dean Cain's chest. So to me, that was a thrill, but it wasn't a thrill because I'm really fascinated by superhero shows, but more because it had kind of a cultural resonance. And uh, so I didn't have a whole lot of time with the soups. Um, and a lot of my stuff was because I was the Secretary of Defense at first, and then I was a presidential candidate, and eventually the president. A lot of my stuff was with administrative characters, and but I was just happy to be on the show, and uh, and one of the things I was happiest about was that it continued my very lucky streak of being on shows I'm proud of. I look back over my career and I think how great it is to have been able to act and get paid for it for as long as I have. But to be able to look at my track record and say, most of that stuff I'm really proud of. Um, there's not a lot of there's not a lot of junk on there. There's a little. You can't make a living without doing a little junk here and there, but um, and I've dealt a little junk here and there, but um, for the most part, I've done feature films that may not have been hugely successful, but were very respected pieces of work. And I've worked with a lot of A-list directors and writers, and uh, uh, and the same thing has happened in television. I don't have a lot that I look back on and go, "Oh God, I hope nobody ever sees this." Um, there's a few, but not many.
Well, I'm going to wrap this up. I always ask this question at the end, and you sort of beat me to it for the answer. I always ask, my guests, and then we can do personal, professional, and you can expand. What are some things you're proud of? You just said you're very proud of your body of work, which you should be. You've had, as I said, you write down. We didn't even get into Justified or John from Cincinnati. These shows that were great shows. You've had this amazing, as you said, luck. Good luck. But what are some other things you're proud of besides those being in those shows that you sit there and go, I am very lucky. What are some things you're proud of?
Well, um, first off, I get asked a lot by young people who are just trying to get their nose into the business, what my advice is to young actors, and it doesn't have anything to do with acting. It's never ever ever hold up production, and never ever make anybody sorry you were hired. Um, if you do those two things, you can probably work forever. Well, I think I'm pretty good at what I do. I think I'm quite good at what I do, but I think I'm most proud of the fact that people seem to like to work with me, that they like having me around the set, and that they recognize that I'm not going to cause trouble. I'm not going to give them a hard time, and they're going to get as good as I've got. Um, I'm very proud of my writing. I've written uh, uh, a fair amount of television, as we discussed, but I've written a number of plays that I'm particularly proud of. Um, one of which, if I hadn't written it, again, we wouldn't be talking here, because that play got me the agent I was talking about earlier. Um, I'm very proud of the books I've written, and and I'm you know I'm proud that I've got a 24-year-old daughter that I didn't manage to kill, and raised her by myself. So and I got way more friends than I ever expected to have. So um, I don't know. There's not much more I could ask.
Yeah, I mean that's
Untold wealth, untold
okay.
wealth. Yeah, that's missing, but it's otherwise I'm great.
Well, that's awesome, Jim. I'm so glad we got the time to talk. And so, what do you have coming up? Anything coming up?
Uh, well, I'm hoping there's a Western that I've committed to doing that uh was supposed to shoot in Spain, and then it was supposed to shoot in California, and then it was supposed to shoot in Mexico, and it was supposed to shoot the year before last, and it was supposed to shoot last year, and uh, I keep waiting for um, uh, all the ducks to line up for that, um, and I don't know if it'll happen, so I won't I won't mention it by name, but um, I'm doing theater where I can, and waiting on somebody to uh, remember a couple of guys named Ellsworth and Bobby Singer and say, oh, let's get those guys on the show.
See, that's awesome. People go check out, go to Jim's IMDb, go look at all past shows, man. You're gonna love them. You're gonna go. It's one of these people you look at the IMDb and you go, holy crap. Even the guest spots, you sit there and you go, wow, we didn't even get to talking to the sitcom you're on with an amazing cast, the Be Positive, which I mean, the cast on that was amazing.
Yeah.
And just people, you got to go and look at his work. And he's on Instagram, but he doesn't he doesn't post a lot, but he has 440,000 followers. So go check him out. I'm on Instagram at Cooper Talk One, Twitter I'm at Cooper Talk. Go to Facebook, it's Steve Cooper. Also go to my website, coopertalk.net. You can find 1,072 episodes up there, and you can email me at coopertalk.net. So remember, I'm Steve Cooper. I'm only as hip as my guests. Don't forget, drink your water, eat your vegetables, take your vitamins, and I'll talk to you next time. Thank you, Jim. 1 second.